Welcome back to Killer Fun, where we explore the intersection of crime and entertainment every other week. I'm Christy.
And I'm Jackie.
And today, holy moly, it's a heavy one. The program Cons, Cults, and Kidnapping on Netflix, episode 1, Where the F Am I? That is a very true sentiment.
Perfect question.
I mean, for real. I mean, I look at this and I'm like, there are beautiful people in the world who will donate an organ to people they don't know in order to save their life. And then there are people who will abuse children for money.
Yep. Greed. That's it.
Ugh.
Greed.
Ugh.
And it's so terrifying because the target was not really the kids. The target, if you're looking at stakeholders where you're making the money,
Right.
it's the parents.
Yes.
And so they're the ones who are being actually manipulated, while the kids are almost just a fun byproduct for them to play with.
Yeah. Ugh.
You know what I mean?
There were very much, and they talk about this, we're only going to talk about the first episode.
Yes,
but they
we
do
are.
talk about this later, about how that the kids are not seen as people. They're seen as units. Mm-hmm. They're units that make money.
Yeah.
That is all. And really, the people in charge all the way at the top preferred not to think of them as people.
Well, how could you?
Yeah.
If you humanize them, then you realize what you're doing, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, full transparency, I did not get to watch the rest of this.
Yeah.
I watched one episode and did not have the time to continue it, but I'm gonna, and I'm looking forward to it because it's so interesting. And I might repeat the first one again because this was riveting.
I mean, it is. And it's weird to enjoy it, but it's really well made.
Oh, for sure.
She did a great job structuring the storytelling. And I think that you'll see that even as you go forward, because there are things that you don't quite get to in the first episode that we see in like a trailer for it.
Yeah.
But that's because she's done a really, really good job of structuring this as a whole story contiguously, but also breaking it up so that you can kind of digest it in chunks.
Yeah, which is good for...
It's hard.
Yes, exactly. It's good for a couple of reasons. One, like you said, it's hard. It's hard stuff. But also, I think it seems so outlandish that she almost has to pitch the problem.
Yes.
And convince you that this is real and that it was a problem.
Well, I mean, they say in the very first episode that they are at this facility snooping around to find proof of what they went through.
Yeah. And I mean, and that shows you how, like, because it's hard, so many won't pay attention. They'll just think it really wasn't that bad. It couldn't have been. How could it have been? So she has to, in the first episode, legitimize their own experience in order to show what's really happening,
right,
and then get you to believe that that really happened so that then she can tell you the rest of the story. Because if you can't get there and believe it in the first episode, I have no confidence that you would be able to actually believe it when she gets to the nitty gritty.
Right. Well, I mean, and the parents had no bandwidth in order to be able to really believe these kids, because they were kids that they already felt were, out of control in some way. And
which also,
we'll get there.
Oh man. Yeah. There. Good. Because I have so many thoughts about that too.
Yeah. So as a documentary, there's not really a cast. I mean, there are people that we see. We're going to talk about them a little later.
Okay.
I'm not going to talk about them here, but let's do a very brief recap. Former students visit the campus of a boarding institution. I'm loath to call it a school.
Yeah, I wanted to be like, wait, school?
Yeah.
Question mark.
Yeah, exactly. And they tell us about their terrible experiences there. If the condition of the files is any indication of how students were cared for, as they were just left in the facility and scattered, I'm very inclined to believe that abuse, much of it was caught and stored on DVD videos was rampant and profound. She does a very good job of setting it up. I find it very believable.
Yeah.
The Academy at Ivy Ridge in Ogdensburg, New York, seems to have subscribed to the tough love with all of the tough and none of the love. So I had thoughts.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a thought provoker.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so the kids were never supposed to be able to find one another after leaving the school.
Right.
Right? So I'm like, okay, go MySpace. This is maybe an argument for social media.
Yeah, right.
I mean, for all the ills of social media, that these kids were able to find each other.
Yeah. So they can validate each other's stories and yeah.
Yeah, and support one another. And Catherine, by her own admission, made a few poor choices, right? That said, she was heavily involved in youth group at church, was on the student council, a star soccer player. Her mistakes that she made sounds like normal teen angst to me.
Very normal. And honestly, she was at home with a rough situation. And that was also not abnormal. It's not abnormal to have a stepmother in the picture after you lose your mom.
Right.
And
especially
what she did.
She was so young.
Yeah, she did. And she was so young. And so, yeah, this stepmother comes into the picture. And so that's not an abnormal thing. And it's not abnormal for a stepmother to not really know what to do with the kids.
Right.
But, and it veered. She was abusive. She was verbally abusive. She was not kind.
Yeah, that was another one of my thoughts that she said on the intake forms.
Yeah, that she
was borderline abusive.
Right.
And I'm like, if she'll admit on the intake forms that she was quote unquote borderline abusive, she was 100% abusive.
Right. And so that means
100%.
that this is not a child who is a troubled teen in the sense that they can't make good decisions. It's they're troubled because they have been lacking basic love and resources in their own home. So this was not her fault.
No, not even a little.
Fundamental attribution error all over the place right now.
There we go. That's not where I thought you were going after fundamental, but yes.
Oh yes, well that too. That too.
I'm not really going to talk much about that.
Yeah, because it's a can of worms.
It is. So poor Catherine was handcuffed for transportation from the Christian boarding school to Ivy Ridge, which seemed extreme. But then she arrived and she had to strip, jump, and cough. And I'm like, oh, it's prison.
It's prison.
It's just prison.
Yeah.
So the marketing materials claimed that the kids would be educated and taught a number of things. Values. That was like a very generic term. Whose values? What are they specifically? I'm like, values for what? Like,
right?
This seems like, okay.
Yeah.
Integrity by people who are okay with kids being brought in handcuffs.
Yeah.
Honor. Honoring what?
Yeah.
What exactly? Accountability. To whom?
Right.
And for what? The people needed to ask more questions. Respect for authority. I'm like, or abject terror of your tormentors.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I got it.
Yep. It's so they used language that sounds military.
Yes.
And so they in that sense, they tried to almost make the parents assume that that was what was happening here.
Also, very polarized Christian words.
Yes,
too.
also.
They feel like they're close to the fruit of the Spirit without exactly being fruit of the Spirit.
It walks in that world.
Yep. Which is,
The can of worms we're not totally opening, but we're definitely peeking in.
That's right. So they gave highlights of the rules and it made me feel sick. Back in January of 2004, Thomas Houlihan, who was a journalist who appeared, described the conditions in the Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs and Schools as constant oppressions. And yet, the Justice Department declined to investigate. And I was like, this is why accreditation matters.
Oh, yes, it does.
If it is not accredited, that should be an automatic no.
Right. Right. It's not a school then.
It's not a school.
You're paying for prison.
Yes. So several of the women put on abandoned uniforms.
Oh, yeah.
In the school.
Oh, my God.
And they dance and they act silly and they laugh and they take photos. And I'm like, what a way to like kind of rewrite that history for themselves.
Yep.
That, you know, I don't know. It was like they get to have a positive memory wearing those uniforms for once.
It takes away the sting of the old ones.
Uh-huh.
You know, it closes the chapter. It kind of plants the flag, says we're free.
Yeah.
And,
like I'm here wearing this and dancing and doing whatever I want in it. And you can't tell me I can't. And I was really touched by that.
Me too.
Yeah. There was the riot that was planned.
Ooh, that was so cool.
To try and get everyone sent home. And of course it didn't work. But I was like, it's kind of heartbreaking that this place was so bad that they wanted to get sent home to the people who sent them to this facility.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything. Yeah. Prison. The guy said, prison was like a 5-star hotel.
Yes.
Like he was so happy to have done something actually criminal.
Yes.
So that
he could go be
in jail.
Yeah.
Because it was safer.
It was safer and much better. Which is ridiculous. Poor Quentin. I really felt for him. So for Pete's sake, try everything local before you send your kids away.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, for real, this is no joke. This is not, I don't feel like taking care of my kids. There are other boarding schools for that.
Yeah.
There are legitimate accredited boarding schools where if you just don't want your kids around, you can send them to.
Yep.
I don't understand that personally, but I have adorable, delightful kids whom I love having around, even though they are, older.
I mean, I know there are a few boarding schools out there that are really built for, a certain life trajectory with intense academics or a military kind of background that keeps them on the straight and narrow, maybe a rigidness that you can't provide because it would be so hard that maybe they can thrive. I get that people are different, but those things are accredited. Those things have great outcomes. Those things would let you talk to other students. Those things would let you visit the campus. Nobody's being taken away in handcuffs.
Yeah. Nobody's being taken away in handcuffs. There's no, if you showed up to the school, they wouldn't not let you in.
Right. Exactly. Like these are different kind of institutions that are, we have one in San Antonio.
Oh yeah. There's lots of them.
Lots of good ones.
And they're fine. But this is not one of them, and neither were any of the WASP schools.
Oh, no.
No. But if you have a troubled teen, there is help.
There is.
Helpguide.org has a whole list of things to help you understand. And also, if you need help, you need to call somebody. Call the National Parent Helpline in the U.S. at 1-855-427-2736. And they can help you find resources available in your area.
That's great.
So this is a help guide. They want you to understand. They start out by helping you understand why teens act the way they do. Their brains are still actively developing. They don't process information the same way. Our brains don't mature until our mid-20s, which means you and I were probably both too young to get married. But, it is what it is. Yeah. Hormones that cause your physical changes cause changes in your brain. They complicate things in a lot of ways. But trying to understand what your kids are going through really helps. And then you should also familiarize yourself with what is actual quote unquote troubled behavior and what's normal teenage behavior.
Yep,
and
please.
They have a whole list of changing their appearance. Is it because they're, keeping up with the times, or is it because they actively hate something about themselves?
Right. Being able to tell the difference.
Yeah. And I mean, reading through this would help you understand, oh, well, that seems like it'd be normal teenage behavior. And The rest is not. They do suggest that you try and connect with your teen, be there for them, talk to them, try and find common ground with them, manage your own stress levels, because the more stressed out you are, the more stressed out they are going to be. Expect to be rejected sometimes. They're not always going to want to share everything with you. That is completely normal. And, listen without judging or giving advice unless you're asked for it. I mean, they're never going to ask you to judge them, but don't give advice unless they...
Yeah, be careful about that. Because that is a fine line, right? Our entire role is to tell them things they don't know they need to know. So they're not going to ask.
Right.
So there is a fine line between creating a relationship, but if you're... where you can do so.
Right.
But if you are not there, then building that relationship over time is hard. And it does take not giving advice or picking your battles very carefully and acknowledging that you're sharing something that they haven't asked for, being very, over communicating, as we like to say like, that I know you didn't ask for this, but I'm going to give you my thoughts in case you find them helpful.
And then don't be offended if they don't find it helpful.
There you go. Because you have to start establishing that relationship, because I get it. Parents are always like, but that's like my entire job. They're never going to ask me, and you're not wrong, but it's about creating a relationship in which that can occur.
Right. Exactly. They give the signs to recognizing teen depression. If they suddenly are having problems at school, which they didn't before, if they've run away, not just trying drugs and alcohol, but abusing them. Things like that. They've got lots of different things to look for. And then they also suggest you add balance to their life, create structure at home, require certain things, but give them freedom within that structure. Encourage them to exercise and eat well, because that really does matter. And sleeping well.
Oh, sleep.
We talk about this all the time. Yeah. And then also, take care of yourself and understand this is not going to last forever.
No.
They're not always going to be this way.
No. They most people will grow out or grow up of this.
Maybe if they don't go and spend years at a place where they're abused, they will.
That's especially true.
There you go. So what can we do? Well, first of all, don't send your kid to one of these schools without doing a whole lot of research, and maybe don't send the kids to school. There's an organization called WASP Survivors at waspsurvivors.com. And if you think that there's a child at a school similar to this, they will help you find who to report it to.
Oh, good.
So you can do that at their website. And at their website, they also talk about how you can support legislation, because these schools are not regulated at all, basically.
No regulations.
Like none. And the suicide rate for survivors of these places is much, much higher than the average. And so if we can try and get, hopefully, federal agencies to regulate this, then kids will be a lot safer.
Yes.
And the kids who are legitimately troubled and legitimately need help will have to go to a place where they can legitimately be helped.
That's the thing. Isn't that the biggest fear, that some parent out there who legitimately has a troubled child who is in a bigger pickle than we could even understand might find that as an option. Although in many cases, that person probably can't afford it. So there is that. But so there's a little bit of that manipulation as well. But all that said, hopefully you can find real institutions that are actually helpful.
Right.
Because when that happens, things turn around really, really quickly. It's amazing. Yeah. So here's how it works. Christy wrecks her search history. Hey, NSA, we promise it's nothing more nefarious than a podcast. To find out what's true, some of the psychological motivations behind the characters' actions, and real-life applications that relate to our topic. I have no idea what Christy decided to look up. Could be the same thing that captured my curiosity or something I never thought of.
Is it true?
Oh my God, it is. All of it's true.
I mean, it all appears to be true. They have a whole bunch of the abuse on video.
I mean, okay, somebody's gonna have to play this at like 2 times the speed because my brain thoughts are very slow about it because I have so many feelings alongside them. So I apologize for dragging this out so long. Oh my gosh, everything's true.
Everything's true.
I am floored by this Catherine. This Catherine is my hero now.
I mean, yes, we see her as Catherine Daniel in the show. She's married and has taken her husband's last name, so she's Kathleen
Kubler.
Kubler, right? Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah, and they own a creative agency in Los Angeles called Tiny Dino. Before that, she worked at Paramount Pictures in the digital marketing department and as a film and digital media production specialist. So this is not her first rodeo, and I think you can really tell.
Oh, you can tell.
You can tell that she is a professional.
The world needed her to make it.
Yes.
And to survive that.
Yes.
And so that she could come out and then come back and tell this story the way it needs to be told. And like to see her do that and then get to do that. And then to see her do it with the care that she has for all the people like Quentin, like when he was starting to panic in the room, and telling the story about how you couldn't leave. And then the cameras were still rolling, but you could tell as a director of the moment, she changed her course and said, you can leave. You know that? You could do that today.
Yeah.
You could just walk right out. And it hadn't even really occurred to him. And like the camera still rolled, but she came into the scene and was like, let's walk out together. Like it was such a therapeutic moment that she chose to take with him. And it was really beautiful.
Yeah, it was really, really beautiful to really like honor that and to be like, hey, I know you're in this space, but you're not in that space.
You're not in that space. And she could have gotten too like entrenched in what she wanted out of him in that moment because she was asking the hard questions and he was giving it. He was telling the stories. He was showing the emotions, like to capture those emotions. And she cut it off. She didn't let it continue. And it could have been juicy. She could have really fallen into that, like, oh, this is juicy. I'm going to get this out of him, like, because I need this. People need to see it. Instead, she really put him first. Yeah. And it shows how much better they are as people than any of those WASP people.
Absolutely. And I think that's why she was the one who had to make this documentary. It had to be a survivor.
Yes.
To be able to free the child inside of these adults from the torture that they were given.
Yeah, it had to.
Yeah. So I'm not going to really talk about the kids.
Okay.
So, because most of them, there a few, but most of them didn't give their last names.
Right, like they're
okay being in it. They're okay telling their story because they understand the importance of it, but they don't want to be found.
Right. Totally.
So I'm not, like we've said, we are not here to re-victimize people.
Yep.
So I'm not going to talk about the kids.
All right.
But there's Phil Elberg, who's an attorney. He was one of the first people to investigate how bad programs like Ivy Ridge were. And he was successful at suing one of them for malpractice because they were saying they were doing one thing and doing something else. Janja Lalich, who I think we've seen in something else before. She's a sociologist and a retired professor at California State. She's the founder for the Center for Research on Influence and Control, which I thought was interesting.
It's really interesting.
We mentioned Thomas Houlihan in the recap. Jason Finlayson, who was the director at Ivy Ridge, and he's married to Maybeth Litchfield, and she is the daughter of the guy who owned the whole thing.
Oh.
Yeah. We saw Florence Sistadecker.
Yes.
Yeah. And she even said at the breakfast, this isn't a boarding school, it's an effing prison.
Yes. Yes, her interview. I can't wait. I'm sure there's more to come of this interview. We only got a snippet of it, so I cannot wait to hear more. And I was so floored in that interview that Catherine did that she was able to just ask the questions and get her side of the story.
She didn't come at it as combative in any way.
No, as if it was a happy reunion.
Yeah.
I was like, girl.
Yeah.
You go. Because that is
She's
hard.
amazing. She's an amazing person.
That's hard.
Yeah. George Tulip was the director at Ivy Ridge's boys program. He's the one that you see carrying a boy out by his neck. Yeah, that's awful. Maya Slavitz is a journalist, and she's done lots of in-depth investigation as seen in this particular industry. Roderick S. Hall, PhD, he was treating one of the kids who went to Casa by the Sea, and he was instrumental in getting that particular one shut down by the Mexican government. So that's how she ended up at Ivy Ridge, because they closed Casa by the Sea and just shipped her off.
It's so sad, but I was so happy that psychologist, he had been working with the family, right? So we can see how it's the parents that get duped.
Right.
Because the psychologist was like, wait, you what?
Yeah, he's like, what? They have to earn the opportunity to be able to talk to you? Like, you're not involved. This isn't the right way to go about this.
Right, like they had no clue. Thank God they had tried local help first. So that if you are conned, because let's be clear, we can do everything we can to try to avoid a con, but there's a reason it's a con.
Yeah.
They're good at it.
Yeah.
And so it is easy to be duped, and it's easy to lie to you about these things. And if you don't have like a base knowledge of those things, you can make a mistake. In a situation with your kid when these parents were clearly already trying to do what was right. Right. And so thank God the psychologist was like, what?
Yeah.
Pump the brakes.
I mean, unfortunately, it didn't save that particular kid.
No.
But he was able to get it shut down, which should have been a big red flag. But again, being conned. And then, of course, there's Robert Litchfield. A lot of these people, we don't see them, but we see their names listed and as a relationship. So he is the founder and owner of WASP. WASP has since been shut down. But he continues to work at various organizations that are in a similar vein to this day. And he has absolutely no education in child development at all. He started as a dorm parent in a similar facility in 1977 and just basically saw how easy it was to make money.
Yeah. And just was like, ooh, I can scale that. That's what he did.
Yep. So the WASP program, the Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs in Schools, is a nasty, nasty beast. It was incorporated in 1998 by Robert Litchfield, as they said. It started a whole umbrella of organizations that were related with the troubled teen industry. So there was not only the schools, but there was other organizations that claimed they weren't directly affiliated with WASP, but they used the same street address as the WASP headquarters for a variety of things. So they said they weren't affiliated.
But they totally were.
So like Teen Help LLC was the marketing arm, and they did processed admissions.
Okay.
And then there was the Teen Escort Service, which is the worst name ever.
Oh, right.
That was transporting teens. The R&B Billing, Premier Education Systems, which did the workshops for the parents. All of these things claim to be separate, but like working with, but they all had their mailing address.
That is awful, right?
So like terrible. It is not in business, but it hasn't been dissolved because of litigation.
Yeah.
So I wish that these people would get some relief.
Yeah.
I don't know that they will. A lot of the personnel who had worked at WASP schools are working in similar industries. Most of the lawsuits against WASP have been either settled out of court or dismissed only because of procedural reasons.
Yep, procedural. And unfortunately, because of statute of limitations would be expired by a lot of the time, a lot of these kids could grow up, become adults, and then actually figure out how to do this and say this.
Articulate it. Yeah.
And I feel like we ought to say, remember when we're talking about WASP, we're talking about like this thing, not like the white Anglo-Saxon.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like not the those schools, like not the colleges.
The WASPs might have been particularly prone to deception by WASP schools. So,
Well, and it's kind of interesting. I mean, that those are the small or fine points of like some manipulation,
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Yeah. Some people
But it is just a coincidence, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
some people are ripe for it.
Yeah.
I don't know that it was a coincidence.
Yeah, you think so?
I think they had a target in mind.
Yeah.
Primarily. Unfortunately, the educational problems at the school were known a long time ago, and nobody did squat about it. Back in 2005, there's an article from Deseret.com that Ivy Ridge, was ordered to refund more than $1 million to parents because they grossly misrepresented their academic credentials. That they had awarded 113 diplomas. They weren't worth the paper that they were written on because there was no accreditation, even though they claimed that they'd been accredited by the Northwest Association of Accreditation Schools in Boise, Idaho. Here's how you know that it wasn't a school, because they were required to issue a 15% refund on the tuition to the 113 graduates. It was 15% education.
Yeah, right.
That's all it was. The rest of it was
prison.
Was prison. And $50,000 a year.
Yeah. For I mean, when they show the computer lab, the perfectly preserved 1998 computer lab, I'm sure it came preloaded with Oregon Trail, and then they had to get that off of there somehow. And then the program that they went through was this online or this computer-based homeschool program. And it's like, wow, that was...
Well, and the computer-based homeschool program in and of itself might not have been bad.
Not bad.
But it was supposed to be for the testing portion of it and not the instruction portion of it.
Yeah, so not the whole thing.
Right. Like you were supposed to have instruction by the family, and then they would go on the computer and do their tests and quizzes and whatever. Right. And then they, could pass it. And these kids just sat there and did the quizzes over and over and over again until
they got them. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was no
learning.
And no learning, no instruction, and then I have to wonder, what homeschool program was this? And did they sue? Or was it really not even a homeschool program? And that's very interesting because it was quizzes, and I'm very curious about it. Like I might have to do some deep diving to find out about what happened to that homeschool program and where it went.
I think they said what it was, but I didn't write it down.
I barely heard it. I didn't really hear it. I heard it referred to, but not really like named. So I need to go back and listen. But it piques my interest because 1998, and they were doing computer-based quizzes like that. That's
early.
Early, yes. Yeah. So I'm like, what early program also got conned by thinking they were being picked up by this big industry.
Yeah.
And then had to change their model.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a sub story that I got to listen to. So I might have to do a little sleuthing and come back. We might have to have like an update on our next episode. Okay.
So one of the things I noticed that surprised me a little bit was that they had a article like with all, it was kind of like a pin board, like what we did when we did the games, or when you see detectives following the trail,
the red thread,
the red thread connecting the things. And that was kind of how it was, all these like pin boarded things with these people's names. And one of the articles that got like pinned to this board was Romney, Torture, and Teens. Mm-hmm. Is that a real article?
I'm going to go, I'm going to say yes.
It was.
But I'm going to say that the headline looked a little bit more scary than the actual full article.
Okay. That's fair. This was written in 2007 by Maya Slavitz, who we see in the documentary. Uh-huh. And it's on reason.com. And of course, I'll have a link to that on our social media. It was an actual article. Mm-hmm. Robert Litchfield, owner of WASP, was Romney's Utah finance co-chair. And there was another man named Mel Sembler, who I think we see his name briefly in those on that pin board. But he was the campaign finance chair for the Republican Party during the first election of George W. Bush, and a fundraiser for George W. Bush's father, who was also president. And he founded a network of treatment programs for troubled youth called Straight Incorporated that operated from 1976 to 1993. There were lots of investigations into those programs, and they ended up getting shut down because of lawsuits. State investigators and or civil lawsuits documented scores of abuses, including teens being beaten, deprived of food and sleep for days, restrained by fellow youth for hours, bound, abused, and spat upon. Of course, Litchfield and Sembler said that this was ludicrous, was the word that they used. And they claimed that the teens who sued have a long history of lying, fabricating, and twisting the story around for their own benefit. So this is what they told the parents.
Yes.
So they're trying to use the same lies to defend themselves in court that they were using to dupe the parents into keeping the kids there longer.
Yeah, that's what they're using, the kids as a easy tool of manipulation, right? Because they're just an easy target,
Yes. However, Sembler never admitted to any problems with the Straight Incorporated School's methods. They closed all of those. However, the Straight Foundation, which had been supporting those schools, still exists. But it's not called the Straight Foundation anymore. Now it's called Drug Free America Foundation.
Oh, yeah.
And it's still operating. It's still like they're still, you can go to their website and donate.
Ugh, it's awful.
It's really nauseating. And of course, this was during the election season leading up to the Romney-Obama election in 2008.
Right.
And I loved Maya. She has, I'd like to quote her. The Romney campaign is aware of the WASP suits and should be familiar with the Straight suits. If not, it's worth asking. Does Romney support these tactics for at-risk youth? Or does he take the line that organizations founded by his fundraisers take, that these dozens of lawsuits are merely from bad kids who make up lies? I'm like, I thought Mitt Romney was better than that. I never agree with him politically.
Well, but we don't have a quote from him, to be fair.
Of course not.
Like, we don't have anything. So we don't know which way he would say.
But you lie down with dogs, you get fleas.
Well, it's true. We just don't know what happened.
Right.
We don't know what happened if he split, if he figured it out, if he didn't know, if they were conned just the same way. And we just don't know.
Possible. Right.
But, I'm always weary of putting words in other people's mouths. Like, that's an ultimatum to decide he has two choices of an answer. Yeah. Not a whole story. So I don't agree with him politically either. And his recent actions have told me maybe it's worth asking. But because like he has held the line against everything to say things that are very true and stay true to his own self, you know. And I come from a place where I used to really, really be mad at him. Yeah. So that's a whole nother story. Yeah. Anyway, yes, that's very interesting. I am like, I'd like to hear what he has to say. And I think she did a good job of bringing it to the surface, though, because you said, you can't just let that be because, it's bringing the cash and let's turn another eye or a blind eye to this. Right. Like, you just can't. You have to address that.
Yeah. At the same time, I never heard about any of that. I wish I had.
Yeah.
I wish I'd known. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, even if he wasn't directly involved, he was kind of by association involved, and I would have liked to have had heard him address it.
I would have too. I mean, so we're talking about his Utah campaign, like, so at the head of that. But that is also his home state.
That's
so
his home. It is his home state, and a lot of the business is
In
happening
some
through
ways.
there. And then this other guy was part of the wider Republican.
To be fair, he didn't
organization.
live there. It wasn't actually his home state when he was running.
Sure.
It's
right.
his home state, like, eventually, like, from his
Right.
childhood, right?
Yeah.
And then he moved to Massachusetts. But
Right.
I don't know when. But
Yeah.
because he was running out of Massachusetts. I
Right.
mean,
Yes.
But yeah, I don't think I heard anything about that.
No.
So clearly we didn't cover it enough.
Right. All of the sources that we use to inform our discussion here on Killer Fun Podcast can be found on our social media. Join us on Facebook at Killer Fun Podcast, exploring the intersection of crime and entertainment. You can find us on Twitter at Killer Fun Pod, or you can send us an email at killerfunpodcast@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to share a link to whatever information you're looking for. We love to hear from you. You might learn a little something too. Psychology break.
Oh, right.
All
Let's
right.
do it.
So going back to the facility had to be really tough. I don't quite know how they did it. So Psychology Today had a, is it wise to visit a place filled with painful memories? And the answer is maybe.
It depends.
It's like really individual for every person.
Yeah.
Jerry M. Berger, PhD, said that he'd done some research and that approximately 1 out of every 3 American adults over the age of 30 has gone back to a childhood home.
Yeah.
Now, most of those people go back to a place where they have fond memories. You know, they're going back to a home where they remember things happily. But about 12% of the people that he interviewed did not have happy childhood memories. And they felt like they wanted to go back
For closure.
Unfinished business, whatever. And that they really hope they'd be therapeutic in some way. And the results were really mixed.
It is really good.
I mean, it's like, that's the thing. You just... For some, it was much harder than they imagined that it would be, that the psychological toll that it took was much harder than they expected it to be. It wasn't nearly as helpful. And I wonder if this sort of being a home, but it was also really like a place of torture, you know, maybe just knowing that you could get up and leave
Yeah.
is helpful, but...
I think they went with a bigger purpose though.
Sure.
And I think that changes it.
Sure. Okay.
You know what I mean?
Fair.
It's the togetherness, the bigger purpose that allows you to say, I'm gonna go do this really hard thing because I'm doing it for the greater good. It really drives a different motivation. So
Sure.
they might find that it was really hard and not really helpful in their personal, progress. They might find it was helpful, but the overall checkbox of I went back and I did the thing and it's going to tell a story that needs to be told can be very, that part can be overall good for your well-being because
Right.
you're like, I'm changing the narrative.
Right.
know?
Well, and I kind of felt like the whole dressing up in the clothes
Yeah.
and, going back and seeing that other people had gone in and spray painted the things that they felt. They weren't alone. They weren't the only kid who was there who felt belittled and abused and used. And
I think that's the difference too. You go back to a childhood home, maybe there's no validation for you there.
Okay.
So if there's no validation, how can you? So unless you're somehow going to find that validation where in and of yourself, right? But in that place, they had others affirming, yes, that really happened. No, you're not crazy, you
Right.
know. But going back to your own childhood home where there's nobody there to kind of say that and prove that for you, that could be hard.
Right.
So, but it's a mixed bag. I sometimes it's just a checkbox on the way, though.
Yeah.
It may not work, But now you've tried that, and now you know another way it's not going to help.
That's
Great.
right. Or maybe you go and you're like, you see it's fallen down and like, oh, well, now nobody else can get hurt there.
Right. There's something.
And that can help you too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't learn the thing you think you're going to learn.
Right. Yeah.
Like going back and confronting someone who was, awful to you or did something of a big betrayal, and going back and trying to confront them, and you might expect some sort of, contriteness, or maybe they have at least the grace to be humbled by whatever transpired or whatever. And sometimes you find out they're not at all, not all aggrieved about what they did. They stand by it, and you don't get what you want, but you actually, yeah. But you actually get, what you do get is like a confirmation that they don't need to be in your life anymore. Because sometimes it's kind of like there's that small hope that you're going to come back and they're going to go, oh my God, I was too afraid to come say, I'm sorry. You're right. And like that you're going to be welcome back and be like, you know what I mean? And when that doesn't happen, it just reminds you one more time that like, yeah, I'm right about who you are.
Yeah.
You don't get
sometimes that's helpful.
Yeah.
Sometimes that is just as helpful as if they were contrite.
Yeah.
Because contriteness can be faked.
It can be faked. So it's like a very, but you don't get what you want, but you get what you need. Cue the Rolling Stones.
There you go. Yeah. So behavior modification is just a tool, and it was misused at Ivy Ridge.
Oh yeah. I don't think, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily all bad.
No.
Like, when you teach your dog to go potty outside instead of in your house, that's behavior modification.
Right.
When you teach your young child not to climb on whatever danger bookshelf or whatever, that's behavior modification.
Yeah.
And those are important things to do, and they can be very helpful. A lot of the research, best known are Pavlov and Skinner, who did behavior modification research. So a lot of the work as it was started was done on animals. Skinner did a lot with rats. Pavlov famously did a lot with dogs. It's important because people tend to change their behavior when they're being observed.
Right.
And you're less likely to have that particular confound when it comes to an animal.
Right.
Like they'll behave the way they're going to behave, whether you're watching or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of a thing you have to remember if you're a therapist looking at behavior modification. Are they going to do it differently when we're watching as opposed to when we're not watching? Yeah. If it's a human, probably.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for real. We are very influenced by the, in fact, so that's a problem because the external validity or the ecological validity can be kind of low, but it does tell us something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it gives us ideas of like in an environment, here you go, that this is with their more basic brains than humans. This is how they behave. How can we extrapolate and use that?
Right.
And one of the things that they talk about in this article from Psychology Today is that effective behavior modification programs for people need to not stay the same. They need to change, or else they'll become your returns are diminishing.
Right. It's an interval.
Right.
There's an interval and a timing to the way that these things are done. So and it's basically using positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Reinforcement always means increasing a behavior, whether it's using a positive or a negative.
Okay.
Right. So negative reinforcement still increases a behavior.
Oh, okay.
Always. So reinforcement always increasing. So so there's a fixed ratio or an interval. And then, so you want it to almost start to become unpredictable when the behavior gets the reward or avoids the consequence.
Right.
So that it internalizes.
Right. Yeah. So you start out rewarding the behavior every time.
Every time.
And then you go to every, third time or fourth time or whatever, but it's predictable. And then you become not predictable, but with an average
so many times per.
Like averages out to every fourth time they do the thing that you want them to do.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that way you avoid extinction, because otherwise if you don't do that process, extinction comes on very quickly. So talking about like Skinner and his box, like the second he stops rewarding, Rat's like, okay,
Yeah.
no more pressing of levers.
Yeah.
Done.
They're done.
They're done. Yeah. Like the dog, like Pavlov, right? The second he stops rewarding the behavior, and then the salivation even goes away. And that's a reflex. Salivation, you don't necessarily control that. But literally the extinction is so strong that it stops a reflex from occurring, right? Because the dog started salivating at the sound of the footsteps.
Right.
Because it was associated with the coming of the food.
Right.
Right. And so that's why they salivated. But the second the reward's not there, you can even extinct the entire reflex of the salivation.
Wow.
So it's a pretty strong thing. And it's interesting because now we can use it in interventions for PTSD, using the idea of extinction to extinct the association of certain stimuli and the emotional reaction.
Oh, that's awesome. Wow.
Pretty cool stuff.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
Yep. And basically, you have to find what works for your kid.
You do.
Or your pet. I say kid because we used behavior modification techniques with my son when he was potty training.
Oh, of course.
Everybody does. But when he pooped in the potty, he got a Thomas train.
Yeah, there you go.
And then, yeah. And then we couldn't, obviously that was an expensive endeavor. Yeah. So after he had quite a collection of them, we'd say, okay, now this one's going to go back up on the refrigerator. And now you can earn it back.
Earn it back.
He needs a break.
And eventually, as that internalizes, then it's the pooping in the potty avoids the negative consequence of having poop in his pants.
Yeah,
at an age where that would be embarrassing. That's negative reinforcement.
Okay.
Right? See, like avoiding the negative or receiving the train is the positive.
All right. So the rules that these kids had to follow.
I was like, oh my God.
Is psychological torture. Because, literally, there were so many rules, you couldn't remember them all to be able to follow them.
Yeah. You're set up for failure.
Yes, of course you are, because they want to keep you there longer.
Yeah.
But so I looked up what is psychological torture. So UC Davis, University of California at Davis, has a publication, Human Rights, that they put together. And that it's deliberate, systemic, or wanton infliction of physical or mental suffering by one or more persons acting alone or on the orders of an authority to force another person to yield. Yeah. And now they would pull out the physical portion of their abuse and say that wasn't psychological torture, but it kind of goes hand in hand.
They go hand in hand, but I understand by operationalizing this, like to talk specifically about the thing, you do have to kind of separate at least the definitions, even if you know they, in reality, practically they go together.
Yes, exactly. So the categories of physical torture. So the isolation, solitary confinement, or pseudo solitary confinement are considered psychological torture. Debilitation, where you deny food, water, sleep, and making them endure extreme temperatures, which were things that we saw. Sensory assault, which you'll see when you get to the second episode with the shouting and bright lights and loud music and things like that.
They did talk about the fact that they had to sleep with the lights on.
Right. And that's part of it.
And it gets worse.
I'm sorry. It does get worse. Desperation, indefinite detention with a sense of futility.
Yeah.
I'm like, they never knew when they were going to be able to go home. Threats, of course, violence, witnessing the other kids being tortured in itself is psychological torture. Degradation, where they're shouted at, they're required to be nude, which is the thing that happened. Overcrowding, pests, things
Yeah.
like that. And then pharmacological manipulation, tranquilizers or hallucinogens, which are things that they weren't supposed to be doing, but they did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's awful. I mean, it's like a Foucault prison. Like,
Yeah.
seriously, it's
Yeah.
terrible.
It is really awful. Real life. Paris Hilton spent time in facilities like this.
Okay. Okay, yeah, keep talking. Oh my
Okay.
God. Yes, because
Yeah, so she did a documentary that's on YouTube.
yes.
And I started to watch it, and I got busy with other things I needed to do and didn't get to watch it. But she, at age 16, was sent off to one of these residential treatment facilities because her parents were conned into believing that her diagnosed attention deficit disorder could be fixed with tough love like this. And she talks about how awful it was.
As far as I know, she connects with somebody else, and they were talking about their experience there and all of that.
And she's advocated for, again, why are we not regulating these facilities? They should be regulated.
And that just shows you the con. I mean, the Hiltons are not dumb people.
No.
If they can be conned, y'all,
Yeah.
that's scary.
Uh-huh.
That's scary.
Yeah. So as recently as 2022, regulations for the teen transport services still haven't been put into place. Yeah. Yeah. It's usually initiated by the parents claiming that they're at their wits' end with their kids. Not to say that they're not.
Right.
But the kinds of stories that these now adults who were incarcerated at Ivy Ridge tell are not stories of troubled kids. They're I don't know if they were parents who just didn't have the bandwidth to be able to handle normal teenage behavior or
ding, ding, ding.
I mean,
yeah.
I think that's a lot of it. And
it's sad because I think we know from the demographic research, we know that most quote unquote troubled teens, people who have serious problems, are in the lower socioeconomic, strata.
Yes.
Right. We know that it's just a demographic truth, and it's because it is a cycle, and that's why we see it more prevalently there, because it literally keeps it going, like it perpetuates the problem. You're a troubled teen, and then you end up a parent too early yourself for reasons, and then it just keeps going. But that makes them not a target of these places.
Right.
And we also know that the teens of the higher socioeconomic status, especially the ones who can pay this kind of money, tend to maybe get into trouble.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily troubled in the same way. So it's really hard because the teens who really need it, it should be free.
They shouldn't. I mean, those kids who really need it shouldn't be going to these programs.
Definitely not. They deserve real institutions, but they would have to be funded. They would have to be nonprofits. They would have to be, and they are. But these kind of things need to make a buck. So who do they need to reach out to?
Yeah. The parents who don't want to be bothered.
Right.
Yeah. It can be thousands of dollars just for the transport for kids. And there's only one state that regulates them at all, and that's in Oregon. In 2021, the law went into effect, and it prohibits the use of hoods, blindfolds, handcuffs, and other restraints. There is hope that other states will follow, but really what we need is federal legislation, because most of these, they're picked up in one state and taken to another. Right. So, in Oregon, they can't restrain you, but as soon as they,
cross the line.
As soon as they cross into Utah, they can put the zip ties on you and put the hood on you. And it's really awful. I mean, it's so expensive. If they are required to be flown somewhere, it's $3,000 plus the cost of airfare for your child and 2 escorts. If they're just being driven, it can still cost up to $5,000.
I mean, who does this?
I don't know.
Who does that job?
I mean, awful people. I read an AMA on Reddit of somebody who used to do it, and they were like, yeah, I really regret doing it.
Well, because I
bad.
could see how they might be duped by
Yeah.
thinking that this is something that's going to help.
Right.
And that's the thing, for parents who think that they're making a radical but helpful decision to send their kid off to these places, it's just they're being taken advantage of. And for those who think that they're helping,
Right.
so sad.
I'm not going to talk about it, but if you felt like for some reason you had to hire one of these organizations, there is a allkindsoftherapy.com does have questions you should ask a teen transport company. So if you really think that your child needs to go to an inpatient facility somewhere like rehab or something, and they won't go with you, or you're afraid they're going to, escape and hurt themselves,
Right.
Because it does tend to be kind of like when you drop a toddler off at daycare.
Right.
Once they're away from the parents, they'll settle down. So if there was something like that, there are questions you should ask to make sure that it's safe. I'm not going to go over those, but you can read that. So the district attorney in upstate New York is finally looking into charges for some of this stuff. St. Lawrence County District Attorney's Office phone has started ringing off the hook after the debut of the documentary, The Program Cons, Cults, and Kidnapping on Netflix.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't
You think?
say. Yep. Gary Pasqua is the district attorney there. He said they've gotten many, many calls from former students and they expect many more. And he is working with everybody who calls. He said, however, unfortunately, as you mentioned, the statute of limitations has expired for a lot of these people. So he's looking at what's possible, and he has encouraged people not to contact the people. He said it is harassment. None of these people have been charged with things who were active in Ivy Ridge. It is harassment. They are innocent until proven guilty, even if though we feel like we have a lot of evidence from the documentary. And they did have to block off the facility because a lot of people were going to visit it.
Do we know if it's not the same DA? I mean,
No, I don't think so.
I wonder how many removed are we from the one that was present then?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because that's the other thing. Like, can you imagine being the DA there now? And then you're like, what?
Can you imagine having been the DA?
Oh, yeah.
And like, how did I miss this?
How did I miss this?
Or
there's a whole other story we don't know yet.
Ding, 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 I think. But they did leave some things out of the documentary, obviously, for time. Screen Rant has an article, What Was Left Out. And there was a man who was a member of WASP and the founder of one of the associated schools, who was found guilty of some consequences for his actions. He ran the Royal Gorge Academy in Colorado, and he was eventually found guilty on one count of third-degree assault and one count of false imprisonment. So not everybody has gotten away scot-free. Most of them have, but they also talk about how the large group awareness training sessions manipulate the dopamine system. That's something that was kind of out of the scope of this, but I think is interesting to chat about. And that there's the theory behind it is that when you have a high level of stress, like what you had at Ivy Ridge, and then you arouse the brain, which they call them seminars.
Oh, okay.
But they don't get to that till the second episode. When you highly arouse the brain with that, and it causes a dysregulation of the dopamine levels and can cause more reckless behavior. It was a way doing that regularly to dysregulate the kids' brains enough so that they would have to remain at the institution. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because the longer they stayed, the more money they made.
Right. Tuition.
I don't remember if she talked about it in the first episode, but Catherine did say that the origins of the troubled teen industry go back to a cult called Synanon that was started by Charles E. Dietrich. He basically saw these kind of tactics being used, but thought they didn't go far enough. So like he saw AA and the way they handle things. And he was like, they need more tough love.
Yeah.
And so like he kind of created this cult, and he had absolutely no credentials. That everything that's done at these schools is based on the Synanon cult behavior. And this guy had none. He failed out of the University of Notre Dame after 18 months. He didn't have any training whatsoever. And then that's what they're using.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's super fun. And then, of course, New York State should have known about the offenses at Ivy Ridge, because they did decline to accredit the institution. And the primary concerns that they highlighted in a letter to Director Jason Phillinson was academic deficiencies, lack of guidance from teachers, inadequate systems for health and safety, students being in the chain of command, students not having access to vital information, restrooms restrictions, and staff administering dangerous student restraint. I'm like, how did they not close it down?
Why not?
I don't understand. But the troubled teen industry brings in about $32 billion a year, according to the American Bar Association.
It's awful. That's terrifying.
It's horrific. So I like to try and end on the lighter note.
Yeah.
So this was supposed to be my lighter note. Emmett Walsh is from Ogdensburg, New York. He is an actor. He's been in tons and tons of stuff, over 200 films.
Oh.
And you would recognize him. He was in Midnight Cowboy in 1969. He was the apothecary in Romeo and Juliet in 1996.
Oh, yeah, okay.
He was Mr. Profik in Knives Out in 2019, Tex Hopkins in Sneaky Pete, Roy Gemstone in The Righteous Gemstones.
Oh, yeah.
So that guy.
Yes.
So
yes.
he was supposed to.
Oh, because he just passed away.
Yes. And March 19th, 2020, he just died. So he couldn't be my lighter note.
Oh, that's so sad. It's so sad that I continue to forget his name, though. Because once I know who he is, I'm like, oh, I know who that is.
That guy.
That guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sad.
He was never like the big star.
No, he
was
wasn't.
like the colorful character and just made a whole career out of it, which good for him.
Good for him.
But then there's urban exploration, which is, I think, what was happening when Catherine and all of the other former inmates of Ivy Ridge were doing when they went and filmed.
Yeah.
Because I don't think they had permission to be there.
I was wondering about that, but I also just didn't want to ask the question.
Yeah. Well, right. It wasn't owned by WASP any longer, the property.
Right.
It sold in like 2009, and then they sold it again in 2019, something like that. Anyway, but it's basically exploring man-made structures, particularly abandoned places. And you'll see like videos of it. And I just thought it's kind of fun. That is kind of fun. It's the kind of thing that my son would like to do.
Yeah.
But also doesn't want to get in trouble.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's pretty dangerous to go into an abandoned mall because nobody's been taking care of it and you don't know who's going to be there. And that's, of course, some of the issues that they bring up on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Yeah, like maybe don't do it. But factories, missile silos, fallout shelters, hospitals, prisons, schools. It got popular because there was a show called Urban Explorers on the Discovery Channel. MTV's Fear also did some of this. So you got to be careful, though, because you can be prosecuted for trespassing and breaking and entering unless you get permission to go in advance. But it is very dangerous. So if you go to a place like a storm drain, it's not made to be accessed by humans. It might not have good air. It's not made for you to walk in. It could be prone to flooding. It might be unstable. There might be unsafe floors, broken glass, stray voltage, or squatters who are not happy to see you.
Yeah.
So,
it's so true.
Yeah. But so while it looks really fun, maybe just watch the videos.
Yeah. Make me watch TV instead.
Yeah. Next time. All right, we're going to do something lighter and fictional.
Okay.
So this is a pretty heavy episode. So we're going to go to An Amazing Inheritance is More Than Eddie Bargained For on The Gentleman.
The Gentleman.
Thank you so much for listening. We know you make a choice when you listen to us. We don't just come on the radio, so we really appreciate it. Tell a friend because it is way more fun when you can listen with a friend. And until next time, be safe, be kind, and wash your hands.
Da, da, da.